Thank you. Good afternoon. Can I have a mover and seconder to call the meeting to order, please? Deputy Mayor Coughlin, Councillor Maude Chapman, that the special meeting of the Council of the Township of Springwater of November 3rd, 2021 come to order at 3:04 p.m. All those in favor? That is carried. Due to COVID-19, Council is taking the necessary steps to limit in-person meetings. As such, members of Council will be participating in the meeting electronically, and the meeting is live streamed. Residents who would like to follow along with the meeting can watch it on the Township's website at www.springwater.ca. Those who are unable to watch the live stream can view it by watching the video on the Township's YouTube channel. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest, Council? Seeing none, I will first turn things over to CEO Schmidt, who will then be introducing Marion Love of ML Consulting to present the compensation review. CEO Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and members of Council. So before we get into today's discussions and presentation, I just wanted to advise Council that we are in an open session of Council, and we are here to discuss the process that was undertaken by our consultant as it relates to the comprehensive compensation review. We would request that you hold your questions until the end of the presentation, and when asking questions, please ensure that they are posed in a fashion that considers the position and not the individual who is currently in the position. Additionally, any questions pertaining to compliance of legislation, i.e. pay equity, we would request that these questions be held and posed in a closed environment. The results of today's review are being requested to be received and further deliberated during the 2022 budget discussions. Staff feel that what is being presented today can be accommodated within the 2022 budget, and we would highlight that the proposed impact of approximately $188,000 has been minimized to the extent possible. Mr. Mayor, members of Council, this time I'd like to pass things on to Manager DeVried, who is the staff lead on this project. Thank you.
Mayor Allen and members of Council, so good afternoon, and thank you very much for allowing us the opportunity to present to you the results of the 2021 Comprehensive Compensation Review. The purpose of the project was to conduct a review of the Township's current compensation program, to complete a market review to assess the Township's salary competitiveness, assess internal equity, complete a pay equity analysis in accordance with the provisions of the Pay Equity Act, recommend a new job evaluation system, and develop a revised salary grid for implementation. The scope of the project did not include a review of other benefits, such as those provided under a group benefit plan, so extended health, dental, and things like sick leave provisions, life insurance, and our pension plan. Some members of Council may recall an external market review was completed in 2017, but a full comprehensive compensation review looking at all components of internal equity, pay equity, and external market competitiveness has not been completed since 2002 and 2007. The purpose of today's meeting is to receive the presentation and the results. Staff are not seeking approval of a compensation review today. Rather, we are requesting that it be received and are recommending that the financial impacts be forwarded for inclusion and consideration as part of the 2022 budget deliberations. This will allow Council to consider a holistic view as it relates to all pressures impacting the 2022 budget and business plan. So throughout the presentation, it will speak to various non-union management positions at the Township, and it will not reference the individual incumbents within the position. And when completing the review, positions were evaluated on responsibility, effort, skill, and working conditions, driving the placement on the proposed salary grid, not by virtue of their title or name. So with me today, I am pleased to introduce Marion Love of ML Consulting, who was awarded the contract to complete the review as part of a request for proposal process. So Ms. Love completed the review that included the external market review, salary review, internal review, pay equity review, and developed a new salary grid for consideration. So I will now turn it over to Ms. Love to take Council through her presentation.
Thank you, Erin. And Erin, just while we're getting ready, can you put that up on screen for me, please? Or perhaps the clerk will be doing that. And just while that's happening, I just wanted to say thank you to council for allowing me to attend this afternoon's meeting. And I'm here to answer any questions you would have on process and the results. And as the city, or sorry, the CIO has mentioned, if need be, we can go into closed session and I can help you through your understanding and deliberations on those matters as well. So just while Erin is putting it up, are we close, Erin? I think we're getting close. I would say, just by way of background, just while we're waiting, that the approach that I've taken in this review is similar to the approach I've taken with many municipalities, and particularly over the last 2-3 years, which has been an extremely busy period in the municipal sector in relation to compensation. And the approach that I've taken is very similar, using the same tools and systems. However, the results vary, certainly per municipality. Are you able to find it there, Erin? Okay.
I'm just trying to look for the PDF one, the PowerPoint. Just 1 second.
Okay. Thanks, Erin. There we go. Okay, so if this works for you, Mr. Mayor, or Your Worship, I will walk through the presentation and take questions at the end if that works, but I'll follow your lead.
Yep, no, that is fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so by way of background, as you see in the staff report, the township has completed a review of internal equity and pay equity in previous years, 2002, 2007, and conducted a review of the external pay market in 2011, 13, and 17. Using a defined set of comparators, and they've adopted a salary grid that's targeted the 50th percentile of the defined pay market. So there has been some activity clearly in the field of compensation for the employee group. Job evaluation, however, has not been actively maintained to capture changes in organization design and job content to ensure job equity and pay equity compliance. The current salary grid consists of 17 pay bands, with additional pay bands for part-time student positions. And that grid has been adjusted annually to account for cost of living increases. Job rate, or maximum rate, in the grid is set at step 5 for the full-time positions. I was engaged this year to conduct a review of the current compensation program, and specifically to take a look at the competitive pay market and the current pay policy or percentile target, which is the 50th percentile of the pay market. And also to ensure that our practices and outputs support pay equity compliance. And then finally, to develop proposed job rates or maximum rates to be included in a grid for implementation in 2022. By way of overview, I met with the CIO and the manager of people talent payroll benefits in June of this year to discuss the project objectives, the tools and the systems, and to introduce the process of updating the job descriptions. I completed a custom market study using 11 municipal comparator organizations. These comparators were selected having regard to historical comparators used by the township, geographic placement of comparators, and certainly taking a look at measures of size and scope of service. I introduced a new job evaluation system to the township in order to assess internal equity and pay equity compliance. And I evaluated the updated job descriptions using that system. This system will move over to the township for the ability to enable future maintenance. A revised banding framework then was prepared and introduced to support organizational growth and job design. So I think it's key to highlight here, bringing in a new system brings in changes, some significant changes, and recognizes that through these outputs. And part of that is, or one of those pieces is a revised banding framework. I prepared 2021 job rates or maximum rates based on the competitive pay market, and pay equity was tested. Given the fact that the field work was done in 2021, I prepared a 2021 salary grid framework, and then that needed to be aged for implementation in 2022. So that was the course that we took. In terms of Springwater's approach to compensation, we can see just by way of the staff report and the background that has been outlined that we certainly have addressed at some point in time elements of internal equity, at some point in time elements of pay equity compliance, certainly more recently market equity or looking at the competitive pay market. And all of this needs to be put in the context of affordability. And these are sort of four key principles that seem to have been touched on at various times in the township's sort of compensation history. At this point in this project, we touched on all of them at the same time. The program itself consists of these elements, and these elements that are set out in the graphic below were also are basically describing the project components as well. So starting with collecting current job information, evaluating the jobs on a gender neutral job comparison system, and performing the legislative requirement or fulfilling the legislative requirement of updating and performing a pay equity analysis. Steps 1, 2, and 3 are all internal to the organization. Step 4 is when we take a look at how we pay in relation to the comparator selected. And step 5 is putting all of the outputs of 1 through 4 together in terms of a revised salary grid. Each one of these steps are relating to the position and not the person, not the employee. We work through, we recognize employees through performance management programs and their placement on the pay grid and their movement through that grid based on performance throughout the cycle. By way of overview, I'm recommending that the 50th percentile pay target be retained as representative, yet conservative and reasonable, having regard to the scope, size, and composition of the 2021 comparator group in relation to the township of Springwater. And on aggregate, the township is paying below the predetermined target. As I said, we've had a predetermined target with other reviews at the township of the 50th percentile. So it's good to see how we're measuring up to that target. And we are low. Not in every position, but many positions are below the target. The new banding framework that I developed supports the organization design and the placement of the positions based on the content of the job, internal equity, meaning how the jobs compare one to the other, and the defined pay market. The updated compensation framework and therefore salary grid therefore addresses internal equity for all positions, and we can say we pay internally equitably if we have all positions that are placed in pay bands using a consistent interpretation and application of the new job evaluation system, and that was done. We have pay equity compliance coming out of this review because we've identified female job classes, and those female job classes have a job rate or a maximum rate of pay that is at least as great as the male comparator job rate that's been identified. Also, the framework also addresses the pay policy or reaffirms the pay policy that has now job rates that are reflective of the 50th percentile target of the comparator group. I'm just going to drill down on some of the key elements of the project. As I referenced earlier, I used a job evaluation system. This is a 12-factor system. I introduced it to evaluate all the positions. This system includes factor language and weight allocation that supports organization design, leadership, decision-making models. It works very well in the municipal sector and has been accepted by pay equity review services. The banding framework that was developed was prepared and holds jobs of similar value. The framework supports the new salary grid and pay equity compliance. It consists of pay bands with an increasing point spread. It's important to maintain this framework, and jobs will be received into the framework as jobs are created or job content changes. Full-time positions are placed in bands 2 to 14, and bands 1 and also A and B are holding part-time and seasonal positions. The township is required to show that pay equity has been achieved with the posting of a pay equity plan, and that pay equity has been maintained pursuant to the provisions of the Pay Equity Act. I reviewed pay equity compliance as at 2021 for all positions, so it was a current year snapshot. I used the job-to-job method of comparison as prescribed by legislation, using male comparators for female job classes for 28 female roles. Where I was not able to find a male comparator, I performed a regression analysis. I prepared a male pay line to determine the proportional value pay equity rates for female job classes in bands 5, 6, and band B, which is where the student positions are sitting. There are pay equity impacts identified for 4 female job classes. Those job classes are sitting in pay bands B, 1, 3, and 5. The impacts or adjustments will be addressed or need to be addressed when implementing the new salary grid. I did not perform a retroactive analysis. A pay equity plan will be prepared to reflect the 2021 pay equity analysis. So you'll have a pay equity plan on file. In terms of market competitiveness, again, this is our market equity. We're looking at the external pay market here. We needed to determine our selection criteria from at the beginning or at the outset. So we look at measures of size and scope of service. We look at, criteria that relates to like services, service alignment with municipal or with the township. Some regard to historic comparators is helpful, and certainly we like to see comparators that are reflective of local regional economy and recruitment efforts. We selected 11 comparators for the 2021 market review. Some of these comparators were used in the 2017 market review. Actually, 7 were identified as or highlighted as having been used previously. This next slide sets out the comparators that are used. We have Innisfil, Bradford, West Gwillimbury, New Tecumseth, Aurelia, King, East Gwillimbury, Oromadonte, Wasaga Beach, Bracebridge, Clearview, Tay, and you can see Springwater's down below. Okay, so I think I'm counting 12, but I don't think it says 12 up top. I don't count 12 there, but those were the comparators used, and I'm sorry for the misstep on the number. So you can see just some of the measures, just some things here, which is highlighting geographic placement. We know where these organizations or these municipalities are situate, but it's a reminder. You see a measure of size. It's in relation to populations. The Stats Canada statistics are showing they're 2016, their data, but they're relative. And you can see by asterisks some of those municipalities that were used previous. Okay, so with each one of these, you could probably say, well, these are maybe one or two might be better comparators than the other. But the reality is when we're doing a market review, we need a data set that is robust enough in terms of size in order to get some reliable job matches. And it's not easy to find reliable job matches because, as we know, municipalities will define their positions differently. So having a comparator pool of 10 or more is ideal. And this is typically the way a custom survey would be developed. In terms of the approach, I matched the positions to the positions at the Township of Springwater to similar positions in the comparator organizations having regard to job title, job information, organization charts, and I matched the 2021 annual and hourly job rates. And again, just as a reminder, we're always matching the maximum rates of pay that we offer for positions in the township to the maximum rates of pay that are being offered to the similar positions in the comparators. I used a conservative approach to the job matching exercise. I removed outlier matches from the analysis so that the results were not skewed. The markets, I was able to prepare market statistics based on 4 or more matches. And that gave us a pretty good assessment of how those respective positions were faring to the competitive pay market. I looked at 2 percentile targets, both the 50th and the 60th, to get a sense of how we were positioning at Springwater. When we look at the market results on aggregate, the job rates, the maximum rates for the township positions are low to the competitive pay market of 50th percentile, with greater deviation in some positions. So some positions are further away from market than others, and the reverse is true. Some are a bit more competitive than others. So it's just basically looking at the benchmarks and running an assessment. This slide sets out the aggregate comparison of the positions at the township to the comparator organizations on the whole. So if we're looking at the Township of Springwater positions, the maximum rates that we are paying, we're about 7.5% below the pay target, looking at the 50th percentile. And of course, the 60th percentile is a higher target, so that it would stand to reason we're a little bit further below that. Okay. Now, we're a little bit more competitive when we're looking at the hourly rates of pay in relation to the 50th percentile. So we're looking at both, and it really depends on the position we're targeting in terms of which one is the most informative. But generally speaking, the annual rates are the most informative. The differences in the annual and the hourly market deviations are predominantly due to the differences in hours of work amongst the comparator group. So by way of example, we may have positions that are paid at a 35-hour work week, and the comparators may have a 40-hour work week for those positions, and the reverse can be true. So this is why we see different statistics or different values based on whether or not we're looking at annual or hourly. The revised banding framework and the band placement for some of the positions has aligned their pay rates for those jobs closer to market based on internal equity. So for example, where it is that we found that there were jobs that really should be grouped with a higher, with a job of a higher pay rate, that helped to lift the job up and bring it into a more competitive space or positioning in relation to the pay market. On the whole, the township is less competitive when we're comparing the maximum rates of pay for the management non-union positions in the bands 9 and above. So when we're looking at the managers and the corporate leaders in the organization. And this is in keeping with market observations for many municipalities in the province. in terms of both the local area, across the province, and in amongst our comparators as well, because similar work has been done by that comparator group. And this is largely to do with the age demographic and our challenges in attraction and retention for top talent in the sector. The majority of the positions in Springwater that are currently sitting on the 2021 wage grid are paid below the 50th percentile. As I said earlier, not all are, but when you're looking at, I guess on the whole, most of our positions are low based on that target. So why is it that we're in this situation when you can see that we have had some review of the external pay market in the past? So I can say that many of the comparators that we've used in this study have completed a salary review within the last 4 years. And actually, I did a count just prior to coming in to the council meeting. 9 of the 11 comparators that are noted in the staff report have done a review or made significant changes to their salary grid within the last 3 years. So that is really giving us a sense of the churn and the change in the sector. Many of the comparators that have done salary reviews have revisited their compensation policy and adjusted their comparator pool and or increased the target market percentile above the 50th percentile to achieve competitive job rates. And so this is why we see the results that we see. Okay. So in terms of putting this together, I am recommending that the township confirms the pay policy that established job rates that target the 50th percentile. And one might say, well, why are you recommending the low, like 50th and not higher? And the reason is that we have a move to make to get to the 50th percentile. So I think that, that seems reasonable and prudent and conservative to get us to at least the pre-established target, but we won't be finished then. I think I've got further, additional recommendations that I'd like to provide. But I think for this point in time, the 50th percentile of the defined pay market is reasonable, having regard to the size and the scope of the group, a conservative approach to the job matching, the attraction and retention challenges within, that the organization experiences, the geographic placement, and that can be, as a measure of, where you're sitting in relation to some of the larger municipalities, et cetera, and larger employers, and certainly economic conditions and other influencers. So that said, I've prepared a job rate or a maximum rate of pay for each band that's reflective of the 50th percentile target. Bands 11 and 13 in the banding framework are empty, and that's by design. That will allow or provide the organization with a framework that will provide for future growth and changes in job content and in the organization. The current job rates have been retained where they're competitive. The current job rates are competitive in band 2. The bands that have job rates that require adjustments show increases in job rates ranging from 1.3% in band 5, so just modest, to 26.9% in band 14. As I said earlier, the bigger gaps are in the more senior roles, in keeping with the outputs that I've seen in similar reviews. A salary grid framework was then prepared using those maximum rates that reflect the 50th percentile, and I used a 5-step progression model with 4% between each step. So therefore, step 5 is the max rate, and then we move backwards to build a framework. We adjusted the salary grid then by 1.24% for implementation in 2022. Again, this is extremely conservative. Many organizations are adjusting their grids moving forward into 2022, but with higher economic adjustment numbers or percentages. So it's something to be mindful of. Again, conservative approach, and we're trying to get our tools and frameworks in place and then keep our eye on it. The implementation costing has been prepared by staff, and I've reviewed this with the staff. using a next closest step placement on the 2022 salary grid. This is reflected in the staff report. This approach is in keeping with the practice, broad-based practice in the sector. It provides a retention strategy that aligns step movement then with performance. So we will have positions, for example, just to drill down on this, with additional steps. There'll be individuals in positions with additional steps that they can achieve with successful performance throughout the performance cycle, which is an annual basis, I understand. So again, that affords basically an implementation strategy in terms of how do we get our employees to job rate, and also lines up with pay and performance. By way of summary, I'm recommending that the township endorse the 2022 salary framework with job rates that are reflective of the 50th percentile and an annual cost of living adjustment of 1.24% effective January 1st, 2022. I'm also, given the conservatism that's been used in this review, and in keeping with best practice that's being evolved in the sector, I'm suggesting that the township consider adopting the practice of undertaking a periodic market review of all positions on a 3 to 4 year cycle in order to ensure competitive pay practices in light of the changing demographics and work practices in the sector. As I said, it's become a best practice. It provides analysis that supports adjustments to the salary grid. It will ensure that Springwater is not overpaying or underpaying positions. And as I said, the practice in the sector has been to take a look at these reviews more frequently than they have in the past. Annual increases to the salary grid can be determined by conducting an annual review of the comparative municipalities to determine an average of what they are projecting for their grids. I think this is important because we have had a practice, and we continue the practice of looking at our peers. And if we're trying to kind of get a sense of how we fare with regards to other municipalities, it's nice to track that year over year and see how they're by what they're, what measure they're using to adjust their grids. This information can, together with information relating to, say, locally negotiated increases, CPI increases, and certainly published surveys that come out in and around this time each year, these will be, I suggest, considerations that will inform council in determining the appropriate salary grid adjustment. And again, having regard to the ability to pay. So my advice is to take a look at a broad range of data and then bring that forward and with a, in a measured response, on an informed response, then determine your economic adjustments year over year. In terms of next steps, as referenced in the staff report and in the introduction, the results of the compensation review can be included in the 2022 budget deliberations. The staff report references the overall cost that would be moved forward to budget. And HR will be preparing, or can prepare, a salary administration policy that reflects the outputs of this review, specifically job evaluation, pay equity compliance, and how the grid is adjusted on an annual and cyclical basis. And I believe, Mr. Mayor, that concludes my presentation.
Before we open it up, could you give us an overview of Appendix B, C, and D?
Sure. Now, I don't have those printed in before me, but did you want those up on screen, Mr. Mayor? Do you just want to? I've got documents in front of me. If you want to just let me know what you're looking at, and I can give you a sense of. I can just walk you through that.
Well, let's start with Appendix B, which is the Springwater Township Grid 2021.
Sure, I can help you with that. So the Springwater Grid 2021 was prepared as a result of the field work that was conducted in this review. So you can see in the on the sort of the left-hand side of the document, You'll see the new similar value groups. They go up to band 14. You will see the positions that are placed within those bands. Those positions are placed within those bands based on the job evaluation results, applying the rating system to the job information that was updated and provided. The hours of work are showing next. And beside that, you'll see the current annual rate for the position. It's not the actual, it's the current maximum job rate for the position, and the current hourly job rate or maximum rate for the position. And to the left, or sorry, to the right, you'll see steps 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and you'll see a maximum job rate. All right, and that's the market competitive 2021 job rate based on the 50th percentile target. Step 5 was determined first, and steps 1 to 4 then developed using a 4% increment each step to build to the step 5 maximum rate. The percentage difference column that you see on the very last column really is just showing you the difference between the maximum rate or step 5 rate in one band as it relates to the other. So for example, if I'm looking in band 10, there's a 12% difference between the maximum rate in band 10 and the maximum rate, which is step 5, in band 9. All right, it's just showing the differentiation in that context. Okay.
Okay, and then Appendix D, which is the proposed 2022 salary grid.
Sure. That document, Mr. Mayor, is the 2021 grid aged by 1.24%. And that's been aged. So the job rate has been adjusted by 1.24%. And then the steps, of course, calibrate as well. And that is the grid that staff have used to perform the implementation costing.
So in the report, it referred to a total cost of 188,000 and change to get to. Can you explain the context of that number vis-a-vis this Appendix D?
Sure. I'll try, Aaron, and then you could jump in. How's that? Okay. So what staff would be doing is we would be taking a look at what the current rate of pay is in 2021 for a staff member in a position, and they would be moving them to the next closest step in the new pay grid. All right. So that's using the next closest step methodology. All right. And then they would determine what those costs are. And you can see there'd be some individuals would be close to a step, you can imagine, and others they would be a little bit further. So the amount that would be required for each individual employee would be different, because this is sort of what I would call the pain of implementation. We've got to move staff from the old grid system to the new grid system. So Aaron, you could maybe drill down and see if I've got that right, but that's the approach.
Yeah. Through the chair, Ms. Love is correct. We would be looking at what the individual currently is making and trying to move them to the next step on the new grid that's closest but above what their current rate of pay would be.
Okay, so if this does the 188,000 and moving to these steps that were just described, does that take the non-union people to current competitive market, competitive salary scale vis-a-vis the comparators?
So job rate would be at, through the mayor, job rate would be at the 50th percentile for those positions, which is, and then as Ms. Love explained, we backed out the 4%. So it would allow for movement on the grid to reach job rate, because job rate is defined as the maximum rate of pay in a band. So it would, depending on where individuals are on the current grid, it may take, with some people may already be at job rate, and it would take a little bit to move they would still have opportunity to move up through the grid.
Okay, before we open it up further, can I have a mover and seconder to continue discussing this, please? Deputy Mayor Coughlin and Councillor Moore. Okay, open it up. Questions, comments from council? Councillor Cabral.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. I have a couple of questions. One was you referred to a pay policy. I'd like to know whose pay policy are we talking about? A township pay policy, a governmental regulated pay policy? And this is, sorry, Mayor Allen, through you to Ms. Love. I need to know that before I can really talk about anything else. That was something I needed to understand.
Okay, I'll pause there. Ms. Love?
Sure, through you, Mr. Mayor. When I'm referring to pay policy, yes, that would be a pay policy established by the township as an employer. So I would say at this point in time, it looks like to me, the township has a pay policy or a practice of paying at the 50th percentile has been established in the previous reviews. All right, the township has also had a pay policy or a practice of taking a look at internal equity, although not done recently. So these are things that are making up the policy or the practice. And I should maybe it's the terminology I'm using that's confusing. And I apologize for that. But it's really the employer's specific pay policy that we're targeting here. It's the township's policy.
Thank you. Follow on.
Councillor Cabral? Yes.
Yes. I guess for me, I have to be quite honest. This is a little bit different from what I'm accustomed to, given my previous career. In my previous career, when you started, you increased your pay either by a promotion, and of course, there were differentiations between levels of pay from one level of responsibility to the next. However, at the start, there were basically 4 classes. And when you were at the top of your class, which would take you approximately 3 to 4 years to reach, that was it, outside of percentage increases obtained through negotiations or bargaining. Whereas when I'm looking at this, it seems that when someone starts or started at Springwater Township, they were looking at a pay grid that had 5 steps in it, and then you're at the top of your game at step 5, and it seems that when you do this review, you re-enter the pay grid again and continue to climb it. And I'm just a little bit not confused about it, but I just see it as a bit of a revolving door. I think it would be something a little bit easier to provide what the 50 percentile would be, and then have that as a starting point, because we're locking ourselves into, if these are based on 1-year periods, locking ourselves into 4 or 5 years. And then, of course, some people are going to get to that fifth step before the next review. So, that's why I'm kind of thinking it might be better to say, here's what the pay is going to be for these specific positions. And we're going to increase that pay by X percentage over the course of the next 2 or over the course of the next 3 years. So I'm having some difficulty kind of wrapping my head around that, because it seems like every time you do this, people are going to be continually getting a pay raise that is not really, let's say, bargained for. Well,
Okay.
it kind of is if we support this at the very beginning. So that's my question.
Let's let Ms. Love comment on that then, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, this is the non-union groups. They wouldn't be bargaining for it. And I'm sure that we would all appreciate that. And I think the councilor Cabral raises a very good point. And he's identified that the market competitive rate, the P50, the 50th percentile rate is the last rate. It's the top rate. So if truly the organization wanted to be fully competitive with all jobs and pay everyone at the 50th percentile, everybody would be at the maximum rate. However, we also have to address the 4th element in the principal statement, which is ability to pay. And the practice in the sector has been try to find a way to get employees as close to job rate as you can when you're implementing a new grid, and then you move them along the steps based on performance. There are some municipalities that will move step to step. So if an employee is at maximum rate, they'll move today, and that maximum rate is low to market, they'll move them to the maximum rate in the new grid. But I can imagine if we ask staff to count to cost that out, you're going to have a very different number than 188,000 for implementation. So, you know, that might be something council's interested in seeing. And some, as I said, some councils will do that. The approach that I've taken with staff in the implementation is to try and get your organization to at least the 50th percentile target in a way to get staff there through a phased implementation approach. And that was the orientation.
I see CAO Schmidt's come on. Go ahead, CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just further to the comments that Ms. Love has mentioned here. So staff has actually done that analysis to determine what that cost implication would be or potentially could be to the township. So to Mrs. Love's comment there, or her statement about moving everybody to job rate, if the township was to consider doing that, you're looking at an impact of over $400,000, and hence why the township and staff is recommending the current recommendation that we have before you today is to phase it in over a number of years, so that again the cost implications to the township is not excessive, if you will.
We've been locking it up at night. That's another thing too.
I think, okay, Councillor Hannah.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you to Mrs. Love or Miss Love. I don't want to pick any one person, and I'm just trying to get my head around this, and I've read it through several times. Miss Love, did you happen to check to see, because you mentioned affordability and ability to pay, did you compare our township, say, or to other municipalities and their ability to pay?
Ms. Love?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, I did not. However, I did bring in the principles of conservatism in my orientation towards the file. And of course, worked with the CAO and Mr. Freed in terms of determining how best to position this in terms of the recommendations to council. And council is probably in the best position to determine whether or not this is too conservative, or they would want a different variation on the implementation. And that's really council's determination.
Follow on.
Thank you, Mayor. And I have several questions if I could just continue to follow up, and I appreciate it. So, Ms. Love, when I look at this and I look at other municipalities, I wonder if their tax base is better than ours, in that they're in a part of the world maybe where there's better corporate taxes. So that's why I asked that question. And the other thing too that I'm just not sure that maybe you could answer is, when you compare what other, let's take the CEO, for example, and not suggesting that the CEO doesn't deserve a pay raise, but taking a look at the CEO, do you compare other CEOs to see if the qualifications, for example, I remember being at a training session once with a number of municipalities, and there was a CEO there who I believe was a lawyer, and I'm sure that ranking would bring a higher salary. Did you compare those sort of things?
I didn't compare, through you, Mr. Mayor, I didn't compare the job specs. However, I have worked with, I'd say, directly doing the very same work I've done with you folks with 9 of the 11 municipalities. So I know what's in their jobs. So I've got some familiarity with that. So it's really just more so the knowledge that I've brought to the organization. Those other municipalities where I haven't done a direct compensation review, I've certainly worked with their data. So, but I hear the councillor's point. This is very much not comparing specs to specs, but trying to obtain reasonable and conservative job matches.
Thank you, and Mayor, if I can continue through you to Mrs. Love, or Miss Love, sorry. The other issue I have is that I going back to what Councillor Corbell was referencing, and that's performance. And I think that it's important motivation, if you like, for our senior management to be able to motivate staff by recognizing the fact that if you do a good job, you're going to get a salary increase. But if you don't, you're not. And I'm just concerned that the way this is structured and moving through the grid, if it's an automatic annual thing that takes place, that criteria gets lost. And just one other question I have, please, and that would be, I'm looking at the top salary there for the CAO in 2021 was $160,906, and it's going up in step one in 2022 on January the 1st, I guess, to 176. That's basically a 10% salary increase. My question being, I realize our CAO does a lot of work and is in need of some salary increase, but does that have 10% always have to be a one-year thing? Can we not stretch this out a little bit over a number of years so we're not being so seriously impacted?
Through you, your worship, I'll address the first question. The second question is identifiable person. I would just suggest you put that over to close, but I will be more than happy to address the first. The first question is such that, and I think the councillor raises a very good point. The intent would be for an employee not just to move from step 1 to step 2 or step 2 to step 3 just because of the passage of an annual business cycle. It should be based on performance, and it should be measured through a performance program, which would include the measure of skills and attainment of goals. That is the best practice in the sector.
Yes.
And if an individual is not meeting those requirements, they should not be moving. If the individual is, they would move.
Yeah. Well, that is that not the premise of the steps, is that it's not an annual move, it's a merit determination based on performance evaluations?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is the premise, but it happens to be that typically the performance management cycle gets lined up, not always, but is often lined up with the business fiscal, which is the calendar year. Some organizations will line up their performance cycle with an anniversary date. I've seen it both ways. One way or the other, there needs to be a measurement and there needs to be a program that can be supported by this framework.
So just following on to that, to Manager DeVriend, what is the proposal or the plan to define step movement for each position?
Through the chair, thank you, Mayor Allen. The current past practice has been to annually move up a step until job rate has been reached. Myself and Manager Marchand, and through with the CAO, we do intend to develop a new performance management process where it would, to establish better goals, where, you know, to move up a step, you would be required to have a satisfactory performance appraisal. But the past practice at the township has been to move up a step on January 1st.
Okay. Other questions, comments, council? Okay, I'll go back to not seeing any other new cards. Councillor Cabral and then Councillor Anna.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through you, two things. One quick question with respect to the COLA, cost of living. For our comparators, did they all provide their employees with the cost of living in addition to the pay grid? Or I just want to know, because that's comparing it a little bit more closely.
Ms. Love?
My understanding is each one of these comparators will be adjusting their grids by some measure of cost of living. I'm not sure if Mr. Reed's gone forward and actually got a sense of what those average adjustments are, but I can rest assured, I'm sure that they are higher than 1.24. I'm confident of that based on the work I'm doing today.
Thank you. Follow on, Mayor Allen?
Go ahead.
Just with the steps, the number I found when I was initially looking at this, if I'm looking at the one that deals specifically with the 2022 salary grid, which already has the 1.24 percent included in it. I'm to take it that that $188,000 figure is to bring everybody in line to what they should be making if this were adopted for January the 1st, 2022. But I wanted to also ask you if you had had an opportunity to see what the costs would be going forward for each additional year. If you knew what the cost would be going from, say, step 1 to step 2.
Well, just on that, based on the previous, before I turn to Ms. Love, answer that Manager DeVries gave, you can't assume that everybody would be going from step 1 to step 2 because of the new definition of how to get between the steps. Also, people will be entering at different step levels, is my understanding, based on their current salary under this proposal. But Ms. Love, go ahead.
Well, first of all, thank you, Ms. Mayor. I'm not sure whether staff have costed that, but it can be costed with assumptions loaded in. And that the assumptions would be, steady state, we're not bringing in more individuals, but based on what we know today and assuming successful performance, these would be and assuming we're going to be aging the grid or adjusting the grid by a cost of living adjustment each year. Those assumptions can be loaded in, and some projections, because we'll be looking at projections here, could be put forward by staff perhaps through the budget cycle. And I'm not sure if staff have gone any further than that. Erin?
Yeah.
Through the chair to Councillor Cabral, we've done the costing in the proposed moving to the step closest to or current, or what it would be if everyone was on the same step, new pay grid, but we haven't done all those additional costings. But it is something I could speak with Director Radigan about to see if that could be done.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I do agree, Mayor Allen, I did take that into consideration. I was speaking more along the lines of status quo if everybody did move forward and we were at the same spot. What would the cost be if given next year, everybody did move up one more step, and then extrapolate that even further, because it would be a good idea to get a fulsome picture of this, because it is going to result in a tax increase each year. And I think really it behooves us to know what to kind of anticipate coming down the road. So I would really appreciate that kind of data for myself. And I would also appreciate, if it's possible, Ms. Love, once again through Mayor Allen, if there was a report that was prepared outside of your presentation, I would be very interested in seeing the full report if that was possible.
Ms. Love?
Well, I can say through you, Mr. Mayor Allen, that this is pretty much this is the report. You've seen everything that I've basically produced for the township, and we brought it forward to council today.
Thank you.
Councillor Hannah?
Thank you, Mayor. And just for my clarification, so I'm not continually confused, but through you to either Mrs. Love or Miss Love or Manager DeVries, I asked about the movement up and the grid as a incentive versus to reach the salary target that we're trying to reach. So for clarification, once we've reached up and it's become we spent the 188,000, if you like, if that gets approved at budget time, will we then be in a position where we don't have to continue to move up to meet our 50 percentile target?
Ms. Love?
I think through you, Mr. Mayor, no, you will be continually having to adjust your salary grid each year to keep up with your comparator municipalities. This is the way it's working in municipal government. So you'll have to keep your eye on that on an annual basis, and most likely through your budget cycle, which is a really great time to do the snapshot in the fall of each year. And then in addition to that, given the conservative nature of this review, the conservative orientation, I'm also suggesting you go out and you look at having a more comprehensive review of the pay market in 3 to 4 years. And that, I think, is my best recommendation to you folks.
Follow on.
A follow-up, thank you. So it goes back to my question about performance versus just automatically moving up. And I think that there would be some pressure on senior management, if you like, to move staff up in order to meet our 50th percentile target would be my concern. And that's just an observation I wanted to make. One other thing, I don't want to get in trouble for asking the question, but I think if we're moving management staff up 4% in our salary target, when it comes to union negotiations, it's going to be very difficult to do anything less than that. And I just wanted to state that. Thank you.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Ms. Love?
Well, I think it's open through you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's open to the parties through the collective bargaining process to negotiate pay rates. That's the time for negotiation, and many times we see market competitiveness entering into the fray in union negotiations. Right, so we'll see what happens this go round. I mean, sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. It really depends on the current state and the adjustments that have preceded, you know, in the other agreements. So I think, you know, I guess we'll see. Is the best I can say.
What was the basis of the 4% between the steps? And how does that compare to what has been the case historically?
Yeah.
And why 4 versus 3 versus 5?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the 4 is really just a model. I've seen, you know, some municipalities will use a 6-step 5% spread. Some will use a 5-step 3% spread. The 5-step 4% spread is very common. There's no real magic to that. The difficulty I have with recommending a broader percentage, and I think one of the councillors has really hit on this, is that each year, if you're moving individuals up, that's a higher increase on the budget. Yeah. Right? So we're trying to get it right. It's about moderation. It's about balance. It's about balance.
Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Just a couple of points. I think it's really important that we do establish some targets and some objectives for meeting our performance goals. I think that's really important for our HR department. I have a question about cost of living increases, and I'm not 100% sure on how they are calculated. So if in 2021 our COLA was 1.48% and they're projecting 1.24% onto the 2022 salary grid, where does that number come from? As it seems to me, our cost of living increases more this year than it was last year.
I see Director Radigan has a comment on that.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Allen. I just want to clarify that I believe through a past council motion, staff have been directed to incorporate an average CPI from the mid-year of the prior year to the mid-year of the current year. So it's an average of 2020 to 2021. And I can confirm, I have heard from a few municipalities, 1.24% is fairly low compared to where other municipalities are averaging. Thank you.
Did you follow on? Go ahead.
Thank you. Mayor Allen, can I just ask that we put the full screen back on, please, and remove the presentation at this point? Thank you. So I didn't get my answer actually that I would understand. So where does the number come from exactly? And if we are a bit low this year, how does that make sense?
Try again, Director Radigan.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Allen. There was a report, to Councillor Moore. There was a report for the 2022 budget preparation that was provided to Council on July 7th. And within that report, there was a section, so I'm just opening it up so I can get the exact wording. So we do use the 12-month average CPI. So we take June, July, August, all the way through to December CPI. in 2020, as well as the 2021 monthly CPI from January to May, and we averaged that out, and that has gotten us to 1.24%. The reason why it's low is because we are using, the CPI went really, it declined quite significantly due to COVID, and it has been increasing quite significantly as well right now. So it's just the method that we are using to calculate it is lower than what other municipalities might be doing.
And just to add to that, they do the same in the county for the county budgeting. So really, you're looking at historical averages to base the projection cost of living component going forward. And as we hear with inflation and as we're experiencing, if anything, that is understating the level of inflation probably for this next year. Okay, other comments, questions? I just want to, on a no names basis, but you did refer to it, Ms. Love, in the report and in your presentation, that the greatest disparity from market value, the 50%, seems to be at the senior management level. And is that a combination of reasons? I know some of it has been that there weren't increases put forward on a regular basis for senior management. This exercise was not done to this extent back in 2017, and before that it was 2007, I believe. My understanding is that the difference between the 221 job rate annual is the current, and then getting to the step 1 or step 2 or wherever step to going forward for 2022 is not necessarily all at once getting them to the 50th percentile, because as CEO Schmidt said, to do that would be closer to the $400 and some odd thousand as opposed to the 188,000. This is just the beginning of a catch-up toward competitive market value at the 50th percentile for the year 2022, based on what's being paid in 2021. Is that correct?
Yes, Mary Ellen, that's a correct capture of where we're at. And in terms of the first part of your question, in terms of the why, and it is predominantly at the senior level. It is predominantly at the senior level in most organizations that I'm working with over the last few years. And that has to do with the aging demographic, perhaps because locally within Springwater, you've had lower or maybe in some years, no adjustment to your senior level. I mean, your folks could attest to that better than I could. But I'm just saying across the province, this is the phenomenon we're seeing. It has to do with the aging demographic, those individuals that are within the sector at a certain age and tenure that have the ability to retire with the benefit of a well-served pension plan, and it's impacting the employment market. It's impacting compensation. And the other thing that's impacting, and it's not just what we've experienced in the last few years, it's what we're going to experience, in my view, in the next few years, and that's impacts of COVID, because it has changed. We know it has changed the way of work, and it has yet to settle out what those ramifications will be. But individuals have choice more so than they did before, right, in terms of where they work and how they work. So it's just something for us all to be thinking about.
Okay, thank you. So keeping an eye on the time, if there are no more questions or comments, we do have a motion, and again, repeating what has been said, this is not accepting the number necessarily, but it certainly was a fulsome study and gives us a lot of information to be thinking about going into budget and factoring that into the other things we're going to be reviewing. Councillor Hannah?
Thank you, Mayor. And just a question, I guess, to the rest of the council. I think I would feel more comfortable instead of just receiving this. I'd be more comfortable deferring it to bring back at budget time. I know if we just receive it, it'll come back there possibly, but I think history goes for me anyway that receiving something has more impact versus deferring it until budget time. And that would be the recommendation I'd like to support.
So receiving it and deferring it, is that what you're?
Yeah, yes, I would like to defer it till budget time versus receiving the report. In other words, we're not receiving it. We've got it, we've understood it. Those who want to ask questions have had an opportunity to do so. And I think we'll have further discussion possibly at budget time, given what other impacts we have. But I think I feel more comfortable not receiving the report, just deferring it and bringing it back at budget time.
But to do that, Councillor Hannah, the staff needs to know what to budget with respect to this. So the second paragraph refers to that 188,000 figure, and there has to be some premise or assumption included in the budget process vis-a-vis salaries for 22.
If I may, Mayor, I don't necessarily agree that deferring it is going to change that. They can still bring that figure forward at budget time. We're going to have a lot of other reports coming forward at budget time that we may or may not have business cases. And I think at that time, we'll be able to discuss whatever other figures come forward. And I would suggest that they can still bring that figure forward or bring a higher one if they like or less. But I'm just suggesting I would feel more comfortable, and I can't speak for the rest of the council, but I would be more comfortable definitely not receiving this, deferring it, so we're not sort of have any obligation. That's what I'm concerned about.
But the motion as stated doesn't create an obligation.
Yes, all due respect, sir, I think we could change the motion.
To just refer it to staff.
Yes, to bring back at budget time.
Clerk Ainsworth?
Thank you, through you, Mayor Allen. What might appease Councillor Hannah is removing the third and fourth paragraph stating that bylaws and policies will be brought forward at a later date, because essentially paragraph 2 does give staff the direction to bring this forward in the 2022 budget for the deliberations. It in no way approves this salary grid. It allows staff and gives staff the direction to bring it forward through the budget process for consideration. And as mentioned, maybe removing the third and fourth paragraph might appease Councillor Hannah.
Thank you. If I may, could then we have the motion read exactly what would be approving, please?
Best to put it up on screen. Deputy Mayor Coughlin.
Thank you, Marilyn, and through you, while Clerk Ainsworth is drafting that, I just have a question, I guess, for Ms. Love. When the comparisons were being drawn between municipalities, was there any indication of the overall composition of municipal staffing? So while these comparators give us an idea of job to job, was there any indication of staff compilation as a whole? So for example, what Tiny or Tay's overall staffing, salaries and benefit budget would be in comparison with our municipality?
Through you, Mayor Ellen, no, that wasn't taken into account, other than that goes more so to perhaps ability to pay. Perhaps that's the metric there. No, it was but the measures of size were important in relation to my exercise of determining a reasonable job match. So too large of an organization, I couldn't get a reliable match, and likewise a too small. So I try to match the jobs to jobs, and the rest of this comes forward on the ability to implement, and that's the ability to pay, right? So no, I don't, that wasn't the scope of the compensation review. That sounds a little bit more like the scope of maybe an org or a design review. I've done those, but that wasn't this project.
Thank you. Clerk Ainsworth, you have to make it a little larger for us to be able to see it and type. Councillor Cabral.
Thank you, Marilyn. Just a quick question. I know that there was discussion about titles and whatnot. I was just curious to know whether or not, I think at the beginning you said it didn't play a role, but our previous titles for many of our staff were directors, and they were recently changed to managers. I was just curious to know whether that impacted the study at all.
Through you, Mayor Allen. No, I don't match on the basis of title. I look at organizational chart, scope, and function. So we can have directors in some organizations that are called directors, and they are doing the same role, have the same accountability as the manager in another. So it's job content. It's much deeper than a job title.
Okay, Clerk Ainsworth.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. So as you see on the screen here, this is the original motion outlined on the agenda. What I am recommending is the removal of these bottom two paragraphs so that you would be left with receiving the report from the manager, from Manager DeVried, and then advancing Appendix D, which is the 2022 proposed grid, to the 2022 budget deliberations. So it would not approve the grid this evening. It would simply direct staff to move this grid into the 2022 budget deliberations, where council would then be asked to make a decision on accepting the new grid, implementation process, and whatnot.
Okay, Councillor Hannah.
I'd like to thank the council for listening to me, and I also clerk for understanding what my concerns were. Thank you.
All right. Is there a seconder for this amendment, please? Councillor Ritchie. Okay, everybody is familiar with this. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Okay, thank you, Ms. Love, for a good presentation, good discussion.
Thank you, Mayor Allen, for having me with you this afternoon and for the opportunity to work with your staff. And as you work through your budget deliberations, if there's anything I can do to help or support, I'm sure staff will follow direction and reach out.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Good to be with you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Can I have a mover and seconder for the confirmatory bylaw, please? Oh, Clerk Ainsworth, you've got, oh, we have to do the main motion?
Yes, please. Which there was already a mover and seconder for.
So the main motion is just the same motion that we just did, right?
Yes, the first two paragraphs. The amendment was to delete the third and fourth paragraph.
Yes. Yeah. So I don't need to read it again. It's the motion as stated, but deleting the third and fourth paragraph. We have a mover and seconder. All those in favor? That is carried. Mover and seconder for the confirmatory bylaw. Councillor Cabral, Councillor Ma Chapman, the bylaw 2021-101 to confirm and adopt the proceedings of the council at the regular meeting held on November 3rd, 2021, listed herein, be signed and sealed by the mayor and clerk. All those in favor? That is carried. And mover and seconder to adjourn. Councillor Moore and Councillor Ritchie, special meeting of the Township of Springwater adjourns at 4:22 p.m. to meet again on November 3rd, 2021 at 6:30 p.m. in a regular meeting. All those in favor? That is carried. Remember, there's a separate link that the clerk has sent us for the 4:30 meeting. Thank you.